They praised my sister and ignored me, but life had other plans. For as long as I can remember, my family measured my worth against my sister's achievements. Emily, my older sister by 2 years, was the golden child. She was the honor student, the one who brought home trophies from debate tournaments, the straight-A report cards that hung proudly on the fridge. Meanwhile, I was Daniel, the younger son, the kid who preferred sketching cars in the margins of my notebooks instead of memorizing formulas. My parents, John and Margaret, never outright said I was a failure, but the way they praised Emily while sighing at me told the whole story. I grew up in a house where my efforts were invisible. If I brought home a B+, the response was, "That's fine, but look at Emily's A+." If I made the basketball team, my parents reminded me that Emily had just been named editor of the school newspaper. The message was clear. She was the standard, and I was the disappointment. By the time we reached adulthood, Emily's reputation had only grown brighter. She was recruited straight out of college into a Fortune 500 company, quickly rising through the ranks with the kind of ambition my parents worshipped. At 26, she was the youngest vice president in the company's history. My parents threw a party that looked more like a wedding reception. Champagne, catered food, family friends gathered just to marvel at Emily's brilliance. I clapped and smiled, but inside, I felt invisible. 2 days after that celebration, I tried to share my own dream. I had spent years working odd jobs, fixing cars in neighborhood garages, assisting in auto shops, even learning custom design from Mentor. I wasn't chasing titles. I was chasing an idea. I wanted to create a line of modern automobile accessories, sleek, functional, and affordable. I believed in it with the kind of conviction that kept me up at night sketching designs until my fingers cramped. So I sat my parents down. "Mom, Dad," I said, my heart pounding, "I'm going to start my own business. I've saved up, I've done the research, and I'm ready to launch." I expected something, maybe cautious optimism, maybe skepticism mixed with encouragement. Instead, they laughed. John shook his head. "Daniel, be serious. You can't gamble your life on doodling car parts. That's not a future. It's a fantasy." Margaret added, "You think investors will throw money at someone who's never finished anything? Do you want to embarrass us even more? Stick to your job. At least that way we won't have to explain why our son is a failure." The words sliced deeper than I let them see. I argued back, telling them I was serious, that I believed in myself. They waved me off. My father's voice hardened. "If you go down this road, don't expect us to stand by you. We won't support you. We won't even acknowledge you. Do you understand?" That was the night my parents disowned me. Not officially with paperwork, but with silence and rejection. Emily stood quietly behind them, arms crossed, a smug look on her face that said they're right, and you'll see soon enough. So I walked away. At 24, I cut ties with my family. No calls, no visits, no birthday cards. Just silence. The first year was brutal. I lived in a tiny studio above a nail salon, with a leaky ceiling that dripped every time it rained. I worked 16-hour days, delivering food at night, hauling boxes at a warehouse in the mornings, and pouring every spare minute into building prototypes in a borrowed garage. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, wondering if my parents had been right. But every time I looked at my designs, I felt fire in my chest. I launched a website. I cold emailed influencers. I begged local shops to display my products. Slowly, word spread. People loved the edgy style and practical function. Orders trickled in, then flooded. Within a year and a half, I had investors. Within 2 years, I had a real company. By 29, I wasn't rich, but I was stable. I had a home in a good neighborhood, a wife, Sophie, the love of my life, and we had just found out she was pregnant. For the first time, I felt proud of who I was. And I did it all without my parents. 5 years passed without a single word from John or Margaret. They never visited. They never called. They knew where I lived. Anyone in the family could have told them, but they chose silence. Until one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I ignore unknown calls, but something made me pick up. "Daniel," the voice said. My father's voice. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. "Dad." "Yes. Your mother and I, we'd like to see you. It's been too long." "Too long?" They hadn't spoken to me since the day they laughed me out of their lives. I wanted to hang up, but Sophie squeezed my hand. "Go," she whispered. "Maybe you'll get closure." So I went. Their house hadn't changed. Same manicured lawn, same heavy oak door. When I stepped inside, my mother hugged me as if nothing had happened. My father offered a handshake, his grip firm, his smile rehearsed. We sat in the living room. They asked about my life, my business, my wife. They congratulated me, though the words sounded forced, like actors reading a script. And then, finally, they revealed the real reason they had called. "It's about Emily," my mother said. Her voice cracked for the first time. "Emily, the golden child. She lost her job," my father explained. "The company downsized. Even executives weren't safe. She's been out of work for months. She's not doing well." I stayed silent, waiting. "We were hoping," my mother continued, "that you might consider hiring her, bringing her into your business. She has experience, she's brilliant, and she just needs a chance." There it was. Not an apology. Not acknowledgement of the years they'd abandoned me. Just a request. They wanted me to rescue the golden child. I drove home with my thoughts racing. Sophie met me at the door. "Well," she asked, "they want me to hire Emily." Sophie frowned. "Do you want to?" I shook my head. "We've never gotten along. She looked down on me my whole life. How can I trust her in my company?" Sophie squeezed my shoulders. "Then that's your answer. You don't owe them anything. Not after what they did to you." I nodded, but guilt gnawed at me. Was I being petty? Was I letting old wounds cloud my judgment? For days, my parents bombarded me with messages, demanding an answer. Finally, I replied, "No, I won't hire Emily. It wouldn't work." Their response was fury. "How dare you?" my father shouted over the phone. "We raised you. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us? Your sister needs you." My mother added, "She would do the same for you." Would she? I doubted it. I hung up and blocked their numbers. But inside, I wasn't at peace. Because I knew this wasn't over. Daniel sat in his car for a long time after leaving his parents' house. The evening air was thick with the kind of silence that follows a storm, and his hands kept drumming against the steering wheel. He wasn't angry in that moment. At least not only angry. He was exhausted. Years of trying to prove himself, years of being ignored. And now, when he had finally built something stable, they wanted to pull him back into their story. When he walked into his apartment, Sophie was already waiting with 2 cups of tea on the table. She took one look at his face and didn't ask any immediate questions. That was one of the things Daniel loved about her. She knew silence could be medicine. After a while, he told her everything. How his parents had congratulated him without apology, how they had pivoted so quickly to Emily, and how they wanted him to hire her as if nothing had ever happened. Sophie listened carefully, never interrupting. When he finished, she leaned closer. "You know what this is, right? They don't want reconciliation. They want control. They couldn't control you when you started your business, and now they're trying again through Emily." Daniel nodded, because deep down he had felt the same. Yet there was a weight pressing on him, the old familiar guilt that came from being told for years that he was the lesser child. The next day at work, Daniel struggled to focus. Orders were coming in, clients wanted updates, and his employees looked to him for direction. But part of his mind kept replaying the conversation with his parents. He could almost hear his father's voice telling him that family loyalty meant bending, even breaking for the golden child. He shook his head and forced himself to dive into the blueprints on his desk. This company wasn't just a paycheck. It was proof. Proof that his instincts, his risks, his sleepless nights, none of it had been in vain. That evening, he got a message he hadn't expected. It was from Emily. Not their parents, Emily herself. Her tone surprised him. Instead of arrogance or entitlement, it was brief and almost hesitant. "Can we talk? Just us? I know things are bad, but I want to explain." Daniel stared at the screen for a long moment. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to let her stew in the mess their parents had created. But curiosity and a small flicker of old brotherly affection made him agree. They met at a quiet cafe across town. Emily looked different. Her hair wasn't styled in its usual corporate gloss, and her blazer seemed like it had been worn too many times. There were shadows under her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't look like the untouchable golden child. She looked human. "I didn't ask them to come to you," Emily began before he could even sit down. "They've been on me non-stop about finding a job, and when I told them I wanted a break to figure things out, they panicked. I had no idea they were pressuring you to hire me." Daniel folded his arms, still wary. "So you're saying you didn't know?" She shook her head quickly. "No. Honestly, I wouldn't want to work for you. Not because I don't respect what you built, but because I know I'd only drag in the drama. I need to find my own path, just like you did." For a moment, Daniel didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Emily he remembered, the girl who always won, always bragged, always carried their parents' pride like a trophy. This Emily sounded tired, broken even. And for the first time, Daniel saw what favoritism had done to her too. It had made her brittle, dependent on praise, unable to imagine failure until it came crashing down. They talked for nearly 2 hours. Emily admitted she had envied Daniel's courage, though she would never have said it back then. She confessed that while she had the title and the paycheck, she had always felt chained to expectations she didn't set. When she was fired, she realized how little of her identity belonged to her. Daniel listened. At one point, he even found himself softening. But he remembered Sophie's words. They don't want reconciliation, they want control. He needed to be careful. Still, hearing Emily apologize for how she had treated him was something he never thought he would experience. When he got home, Sophie asked how it went. Daniel told her everything, and she smiled softly. "Maybe this is the good that comes out of all of it," she said. "Not fixing your parents, but finding a way to see your sister for who she really is." The days that followed were calmer, though his parents didn't give up easily. They sent more messages, each one dripping with guilt and accusations. Daniel ignored them. Instead, he focused on his growing business and on Sophie, who was now glowing with the first signs of pregnancy. He reminded himself daily what mattered, building a life where his own child would never feel like he had. Still, the family tension spilled into the extended relatives. An aunt reached out, telling Daniel that Robert and Linda had been spreading stories about his selfishness. He sighed, knowing this was coming. But to his surprise, the aunt and several cousins stood up for him. They told him he had nothing to prove, that they'd seen how his parents favored Emily for years, and that success didn't erase old wounds overnight. One evening, Emily called again. This time, she sounded more determined. "I confronted them," she said. "I asked why they drag you into this, why they made it seem like I was begging. They denied everything at first, then twisted it into saying they were just trying to protect me. But I told them I don't need protection. I need space." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then asked, "And how did that go?" Emily gave a small laugh, humorless. "About as well as you'd expect. Mom cried, Dad lectured me, but I stood my ground. I told them if they wanted any relationship with me, they had to stop using you as a scapegoat. For once, I think they realized I meant it." Daniel felt something shift inside him. For years, he had carried the burden alone. But now Emily was shouldering part of it. Maybe she really had changed. Weeks passed. The tension didn't vanish, but it dulled. Robert and Linda, perhaps realizing their grip on both children was slipping, went quieter. Daniel poured his energy into preparing for fatherhood, supporting Sophie, and expanding his business. One Saturday morning, as he worked in the garage on a new prototype, Emily stopped by. She brought coffee and a hesitant smile. "I know I can't undo the past," she said, "but maybe we can start with this. Brother and sister. No golden child. No forgotten child. Just us." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then handed her a wrench. "Then help me with this. It's tricky." She laughed, rolled up her sleeves, and for the first time in their lives, they worked side by side, not as rivals, but as equals. The day Sophie gave birth to our son was the day everything else faded into background noise. Holding that tiny life in my hands, feeling the weight of responsibility and the surge of love I'd never known before, I realized something important. The past couldn't define me anymore. My parents' favoritism Emily's golden child pedestal, the years of silence. It all paled compared to this moment. I was a father now, and I was determined that my child would never feel like second best. For the first weeks, life was a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and quiet joy. Sophie and I worked as a team, exhausted but happy. Emily came by, sometimes with food or small gifts, her way of showing support without intruding. Each time, I saw in her eyes a sincerity I hadn't believed possible years ago. One afternoon, as I rocked my son to sleep, Emily sat across from me and whispered, "You're already a better parent than we ever had." Her voice cracked and tears filled her eyes. I didn't answer, just squeezed her hand. That was enough. But the shadow of my parents still lingered. They hadn't met their grandson. They hadn't apologized. And part of me wondered if I even wanted them to. Then one evening, an envelope arrived. No return address, just my name written in my father's sharp handwriting. Inside was a letter, longer than anything Robert had ever written to me in my life. "Daniel," it began, "I know I don't deserve your attention, but I'm writing because I don't know how else to reach you. I see now what I did. I put Emily on a pedestal and left you in the shadows. That was my failure, not yours. When you proved me wrong, instead of celebrating you, I tried to use you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll allow us to meet our grandson. If you can't, I understand. I only want you to know I'm proud of you." I read the letter 3 times, my heart pulling in opposite directions. Part of me wanted to burn it. Another part wanted to believe him. Sophie placed a hand on my shoulder. "What do you feel?" she asked gently. "I feel tired," I admitted. Tired of carrying this weight. But I also feel like maybe he's trying. Maybe for once, he sees me. A week later, I agreed to meet them. Not at their house, at a neutral place, a small park where families gather on weekends. I brought Sophie and the baby. Emily came too, her presence like a shield. When Robert and Linda saw their grandson, their faces softened in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. Linda cried openly, reaching out but stopping when she saw me hesitate. Robert cleared his throat, his voice trembling. "He's perfect," he whispered. We sat on a bench, awkward at first, then slowly the conversation turned gentle. They didn't ask for favors. They didn't lecture. For once, they just listened as I told them about my business, about Sophie, about the sleepless nights of new parenthood. Emily chimed in, adding her own updates, and for the first time in years, it felt like a family gathering without competition. When it was time to leave, Robert looked at me with wet eyes. "I know words can't erase the past, but I want to try. Not as a demand, just as your dad." I studied him for a long moment. Then I nodded. Trying is all I can ask. As we walked back to the car, Sophie squeezed my hand. "How do you feel?" she asked. I smiled, watching Emily play peekaboo with my son. Lighter. For the first time, lighter. In the months that followed, things didn't magically transform. My parents were still awkward, still learning. Sometimes they slipped into old habits, but Emily and I held them accountable. The difference was they tried, and that effort mattered more than perfection. My business grew steadily, but more importantly, my family thrived. Sophie and I built a home filled with laughter and warmth. Emily started her own consulting venture, carving her identity outside of the golden pedestal. And my parents, slowly, carefully, earn a place in our lives again, not by demanding it, but by respecting boundaries. I often think back to that night years ago when I walked away from them, humiliated and alone. If I could speak to that younger version of myself, I'd tell him, "You're not an embarrassment. You're proof that resilience can turn rejection into strength." And as I hold my son in my arms, I know the cycle is broken. He will grow up knowing he is enough, not because of titles or achievements, but because he is loved. That is my victory, not revenge, not proving them wrong, but building a family where no one is the golden child and no one is forgotten.